Okay, I'm going to go back to the editor here, and in our container.php file, I wanted to point out a second place where it seems like a YAML file might be ideal. So if we look at all of these things that we're registering to our dependency injection container, it seems like we should be able to isolate this out into an array. In each of these register calls here, we set a name for the service that we're registering to the dependency injection container. In some of these, we also set up arguments. In others, we add method calls. But across the board, we register items in a predictable way. And it seems like we should be able to reduce the amount of code here and increase the readability by creating a YAML file that sets up all of this data, and then a bit of logic to run all of these registrations. And indeed, we can do just that. But before we do that, let's explore the YAML syntax a little deeper, and let's get a sense of exactly how it's structured. So let's jump back to the resource pack directory, and you see this fifth step here, app.php, removing unnecessary code. Let's do that really quick before we jump into the YAML syntax. I'll open this up, and you'll see that it's just a PHP statement, nothing special here. We can remove everything in our app.php file. I'm going to jump over to that file now, because everything here is just setting up our routes and adding the use statements to use the classes that allow us to register routes. So we'll just replace this with an empty PHP statement and save it. And now let's go back to our resource pack directory. So what we're going to do is copy over this sixth step, YAML syntax.yml, breakdown of YAML syntax, over to our source folder. So I'm going to right click and copy, and then jump over to our source folder and paste it in. And I'm going to rename it YAML syntax.yml, just by removing the prefix and suffix here. And now we're going to take over our container.php file briefly in order to parse this YAML file. This is so we don't have to set up another controller. So I'm going to go back to the resource pack, and let's open up the seventh step, which is container.php, testing output of a YAML file as an array. I'm going to compare the container.php code to what's in our step file. So you can see we're just adding this chunk right here up at the top. We're using the YAML Symphony component, and then we're using the YAML class, in particular the parse method, which is a static method, you can tell because of these double colons here, and we're passing it the location of the YAML syntax.yml file. Now what YAML parse does is it just takes a YAML file and it converts it into an array without any special processing. In our previous step, when we pulled in the routes, there was some special processing that went on there. But YAML parse is just generic. And finally, we're taking this array and we're doing a dump of it so we can see the output, and then we're just killing the script by saying die. So we're totally hacking this into the container.php file, but we'll pull it out before our next steps. I'm going to exit out of this comparison, and I'm going to copy the code that's in this seventh step, and I'm going to paste it over the code that's in our container.php file and save it. So now, if we jump back to the browser and refresh, we should see a var dump. Now this might look a little bit different depending on if you have some tool that makes the var dump pretty, but it should look something like this. So what I'm going to do is move this to half of the screen so we can compare it in line with our YAML file and see how our YAML file converts to the array. I'm going to jump to our YAML syntax.yml file, and I'm going to open that up in my editor. So now we have our code over here on the left, and we have our output over here on the right.